Now, this is a conversation that we've been having for a long time. And then just yesterday, we saw an event by the NDPC, the National Development Planning Commission. They have launched another vision, Vision 2057, a 40-year development plan. And we thought, okay, that is interesting. And why is it interesting? It is because of the season in which we are. This is the political season. The political parties are currently in the process of drafting their manifestos. And so if you really want to catch your attention, what you do is to lay before them what the National Development Plan is. And you hope that they will then incorporate that into their manifestos. And so the timing was perfect, indeed. Because the challenge we face over the years when it comes to national development plans is that the political parties fail to adopt them. And every political party that comes to power wants to revise the existing development plan, and so we end up with real nothing. So let's pause for a second on the back of the event yesterday to launch this 40-year development plan, this revised plan, and have a real conversation, a conversation for the moment we are in. We have some 6 months on election, let's say slightly over that. Will this make a difference? This long-term thinking in the midst of this shorter political cycle that the political parties then feel they're unable to work with. But there's something else I noticed that I also need to highlight. Because over the years, we've seen that we've had several development plans. And there is one common thread that you find when you begin to pore over the development plans we've had since independence, is that they always miss their targets. We fail to implement them, right? And I want to go all the way back to the famous Nkrumah 7-year development plan, which was great. It was overthrown and abandoned. We haven't done much with that particular document since. Something was started, but not completed. And that we see is part of the trend that we see over the period. Ghana Vision 2020, of course, the broader target was to attain middle income status. We attained lower middle income status, pretty still shaky. But when you compare the broader vision around that, I mean, it's the overarching theme and overarching objective, attain middle income status, lower income middle status was achieved. But what about the broader circumstances around that, the broader picture beyond just saying you are lower middle income country, and how that reflects in the lives of the people? So infrastructure was going to be accompanying that particular vision, and we had a 3D images, the artist's impression of what it will look like when we hit 2020, and it was to improve the lives of the people, right? So whereas, yes, we hit the lower middle income status, can we really say that it really led to the improvement of people's lives significantly, as we had anticipated? Clearly, that is a no. And that's one of the other themes you see in the vision, the articulated vision for each of them is about the people's lives, about welfare, right? We'll see that as we go through. And then you look at the Ghana Poverty Reduction Strategy, 2022, and then you come to the 2018, the Black Star Rising, long-term, again, National Development Plan. That was a 40-year, again, so this 40-year plan isn't really new. This is a revision of what already exists. Again, in 2019, we had another one, the Ghana at 100, which again was one that we celebrated because we put a plan together and we're looking forward to what Ghana will be when we turn 100. And where we are now, 100 is not that far off. We look at, then we're now talking about vision, the 2024 version of things, Vision 2057. We're now talking about a long-term national development perspective framework. Now, the thing to highlight, though, is that in 6 years, we've had 3 revisions of the National Development Plan. On the average, every 2 years, we revise it somewhat. Is that a good thing? And why is that the case? That from 2018, 2019, 2024, different versions of the document have emerged. We'll try and make sense of it all when we sit down for a conversation. Another thing, obviously, are the stated goals for each of the documents that have been put out. Of course, the Ghana at 100 had one that is really great in the language in terms of what we wanted to achieve, right? It talks about establishing a strong economy. An economy really is the defining factor for almost everything. That creates opportunities, very important, inspires people to start businesses, stimulates expansion of existing businesses. Ultimately, and this is the part that I want to emphasize, leads to the creation of jobs, increased economic growth, and higher incomes for everybody. So, bold vision, indeed, for everybody else. But again, where are we in implementing this? Before we come to this one, that was again revised in 2018. Where are we in the first one that I mentioned, right? We need to get the updates on this plan. Every year, you must have a target to achieve, and then that adds up ultimately to when you get to 100. And then we come to the 2018 one that also had its own stated vision, systematically enhance the living standards of Ghanaians over the 40-year period. That's broad, the broad goal that was set there in that document. Economic, social, same really. All of them had the same broad framework when it comes to what they wanted to achieve. And then come to the 2022 one, the poverty reduction strategy, which we know reducing poverty by creating wealth and accelerating the reduction of poverty across the country. Can we say that we've done this? What has happened rather is the divide between the poor and the rich widening. That disparity has been a key problem for us over the years. And then you come to the Vision 2020. And growing up, that was something that we really said, it rolled off your tongue almost. And we had this long-term vision aims to achieve middle income status by 2020, which is what I said earlier, which we attained lower middle income status over that. And then you have the improvements one, much talked about indeed, and that, as we know, because it was overthrown, was quite not achieved yet. But there have been many obstacles to why we have not quite realized what we planned. We have changes in government. The parties say the 4-year term, too small. It's not long enough for us to make any meaningful, sustained impact in implementation. So, former President Kufuor recommended, let's now amend the constitution and increase the terms to 5 years, right? What's the conversation around that? We'll see. But does that play into the challenges? We have the political parties themselves. They don't want to adhere to it. Everybody comes in with their own manifesto, their own vision that is completely misaligned with what is in the National Development Plan. There's also lack of support from the public. And this conversation is important tonight because people don't even know what is in the National Development Plans. What are we doing to carry people along, right? We have the global shocks. And you'll notice in this one that was launched yesterday that they mention the shocks, COVID-19, the current geopolitical, economic challenges that we're seeing, Ukraine that is also, pitching the various global powers against each other. Of course, Africa is in the middle somewhere that you then need to account for, right? So then that also becomes an issue. Corruption is always a big problem every single time these documents are put together. And they put together the varied reasons for this, all fundamentally aiming to improve our lives and get this economy thriving to a point where to create wealth, in summary, is what they want to achieve. And then you look at the various drivers that will move us there. Macroeconomic stability is key. We've not had that for a while. It's been exacerbated over the last few years because of COVID, but also because of the challenges with management of the economy. Mismanagement is clearly an issue. Look at the peace and security, something we have in abundance that we are not taking for granted. Land reforms is there, always an issue. I'm curious to know how this document proposes to address that. Advancing science and technology, enhancing human capital is, again, one way in which they propose to do this. And then you look at the key targets by 2050. And I like this one, right? Because when you look at the targets, they are very bold. We're looking at non-oil GDP of some 5% minimum, right? That is very bold. How do you get there is what the document will try and filter. Then you want to maintain overall GDP growth of 7%. Again, that's very, very bold. You want to maintain overall. So in other words, it has to be sustained over a period. You need to be averaging 7%. To do that, you need to be doing some miracles in Ghana, considering where we currently are, right? again, a question to ask is, are we being over-ambitious and unrealistic in making these bold, setting these bold targets, right? Growth polls in 16 regions. It's a key one, for example, that we've heard some of the political parties tap into already. Cheddar has been talking about that. It says Accra and Kumasi basically where all the growth polls are. You want to extend it across the country. Okay, so how do you get the parties to buy into that? Per capita GDP of at least $8,500 is something that they, again, want to reach within this period. And then 20% minimum when it comes to tax to GDP ratio, which is very, very low indeed. So these are very good targets to set. It's one thing setting the target, it's one thing attaining it. There's a key question here. And how are we going to do that? And how are the crafters of this new document working to ensure buy-in from the political parties? And look, so how do you do this? They've told us a few things. They want to operationalize through medium-term plans. So every medium term, every now and then, the medium term, they'll put in this operationalization documents and the frameworks that will allow us to do this and achieve it, preparing and implementation of medium-term development plans. And then NDPC itself will have the oversight on this. And I'm curious about that mandate and how they plan to deploy that to make sure that this becomes a reality, but also they have this annual action plans that they also want to activate, right, in achieving this. My guest will join me for a conversation pretty shortly. And the issue about continuity is important. They want to draw on that. The Constitution actually lays the foundation for that, but nobody really pays attention to it. So let's have this conversation. At the time when the parties are drafting the manifestos, we'll see if this time we can get broad political stakeholder buy-in so that it don't just become another great document that has been drafted that never really get achieved, only to be revised again in the next few years. Stay with me for a conversation after this. And thanks for staying with us. PMX is always brought to you by Syntex tanks. It is strong, it is tough, and I always recommend to use Syntex tanks on the show because they have the most durable tanks, but also come in various colors. It is bespoke. You can go and choose which size, which color you want. And they also have the customer specs order. You can also find them across the country. They have 7 years warranty. And you can call them nationwide on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. A strong, a tough. My guest joining me for a conversation tonight is the former majority leader who will join us pretty shortly, Osechi Mensah. He's also the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs. And this is something that he's been championing and aggressively so as a politician and the leading one of that in the governing New Patriotic Party. We'll pick his thoughts on this. Also joining us for a conversation tonight is Dr. Kojo Evans Mensah, who is the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. And the last time I hosted him, it must have been a couple of years back, we were talking about this, and he was telling me about how he believes the last plan before this one, there may have been some slight derailment in terms of the targets that they set there. I don't know whether this particular one brings it back on track. We'll pick his thoughts on that. Professor Bafo Ejibendria, you know him, who obviously has been also talking about this for quite a while. He's a former UN Senior Governance Advisor, also joins me. And listen, the thing about these documents is that the political parties themselves sometimes do not buy into it. Not sometimes, I've never bought into it. And so it doesn't become a reality. So can we get the parties now to buy into this now? Let's bring in Peter Boamo Tokuno. He's a former Deputy General Secretary of the party, and he's very keen within the NDC circles around the issues about research, policy, and integration of some of these key issues. And he joins me now for a conversation too on this. I want to start with Isiama Brampa Mensah, of course, who he heads the NDPC. Mr. Brampa, thanks for joining me again. Always a delight to talk to you. When I saw that you launched this document yesterday, I couldn't just help but bring you on so we can expand on it a bit more. And I need to ask you first off, help me appreciate how this one you just outdoored is different from the 2018 and 2019 documents. Please unmute for me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I can hear you now, yes.
Yes, great. And let me also say good evening to all the panelists, and all of them are friends and very well known to me, and then also to your listeners. We've gone through many, series and activities related to planning right from It goes all the way back to 1920, as you've shown some of them. This is part of a whole system and a process that we are undertaking to make real what planning is and bringing it to fruition. Basically, that's what we've been doing. The 2018 document is a very rich technical document. Good analysis, good setting of targets, good strategies, implementation, and all that. The challenge you've had in the past, and not only that, but the subsequent ones, and the ones preceding that, had been the detailed nature of some of these plans that we pursue. The more detail and the more you go into activities, it makes it a bit prescriptive, given the range of years that we're supposed to cover. If you look at the Vision 2020, it gave basically a framework which indicated the direction we wanted to go as a country. And then the idea was to have segments of 4 years. The first 4 years was taken, and subsequently it had to be changed. So that has been the pattern. This one, the framework, brings to fruition the vision of the country, given all the discussions and all the interactions that have been undertaken, right from the 40-year development plan and others. We're able to define certain goals, which takes into consideration all this thinking and where we want to go as a country, our vision, our perspective, our aspirations. And then these goals were also redefined into clear objectives under each of the what we call dimensions: the economy, the social direction or policy, and then we have governance, we have also infrastructure and settlement development. And then we have, in addition to that, what we call the disaster management or emergency response. So these areas have under them defined objectives. You mentioned some of them in your introduction. And what we've done in that sense is to identify what are the alternative strategies that we can indicate to help us achieve these objectives and then attain the goals. And then out of that, there are defined targets which will help us through the trajectory. What we are going to achieve in 2057, and then drive it back logically. If we want to do that, what are the various chronological attainment that we need to have achieved before getting there? So within a segment of 10 years, what should be the defined targets for each of these areas in terms of the objectives? And then break them down further to the 4-year segments, which are the medium-term development plans. So this is the system that we have created. What we have not done in this framework is the detailed programs, projects, and activities. The assumption here, which we have been able to develop from our experience, is that basically the programs, projects, and actions belongs to governments which have been elected with a mandate and be able to governize the people around that in order to attain these defined targets, which are responding to our aspirations expressed in the goals through the objectives and the strategies. So this is basically what is different from these plans. In that sense, the framework becomes more indicative, more target-oriented, more holding governments accountable than making it prescriptive.
So does that mean that the 2019 one, the Ghana at 100, the 2018 document, those two documents are no longer relevant documents now?
No, they're very relevant. Basically, if you look at the framework, it is built upon the information which have already been obtained from the 2018, from all the subsequent plans, not only the 2018 plan, but all the subsequent plans contributed to that. Because plans, you can never throw it away. The information is important. As I said, it's a very good technical document.
So, and in 2019 one, Ghana 100, have we abandoned it now?
The Ghana at 100 is a summary. If you look at the 2019, it's a summary to make it, to create a public relations on the 2014-2018 document. So whilst the 40-year plan, the 2018 document, it emphasizes on the technical element. If you look at Ghana at 100, it is basically reaching out to the public to make it friendly so that the public will be able to appreciate what is in the 40-year development plan.
Just in summary, the 2024 one you launched yesterday, which is a Vision 2057,
yes,
has greater detail
exactly
on how to get there.
Exactly. The targets.
For the targets.
The goal and the targets.
Okay.
Yes.
And so this is more prescriptive?
More indicative.
Indicative.
Yes.
Okay. Than what we've had in the past.
Yes. The past one has been more prescriptive activities, programs, projects.
Okay.
But this one says this is where we want to achieve as a country.
And this
These
is
are
how
aspirations.
And this is how you get there.
Exactly. These are the strategic means to get there, going through the process. And more importantly, these are the targets we will use to assess and measure the performance and the trajectory of getting there of respective governments who are elected and given the mandate.
But every long-term development plan necessarily must have targets, must have a means of measuring whether you're attaining the goals or not. Exactly. So it's a standard feature of every development plan, is it not?
Exactly. So it
can't be a distinguishing feature than the 2024 one.
No, let me put it there. What we have done with this feature is the logic trace of what we have to do in that whole regime of 40 years. So it breaks it down to 10 years, it brings it down to 4 years, and then it brings it down to annual basis. But the key thing here is that it doesn't define the specific activities as related to these targets. That becomes a function of an elected government. Okay. That these are the targets. This is what we want. This is what this objective seeks to attain. But how you would do it is a technical matter related to you as a government and, of course.
But you must do that within the framework that you've established. Stay with me. I want to bring in Professor Bafo. Prof, give me your comment on what you've just heard there.
Well, first of all, let me commend my very good friend, Dr. Brampa, for the great work that they're doing there. Just as under the previous government, I think those guys also put together a very solid document. The only distressing thing about this is that after they put in so much effort, we don't see much coming out of it just because of the way our politics are structured. There's another interesting intellectual underpinning here we need to really explore. You see, when you have a country like Ghana, that hopefully we say we are democratic and therefore people should be at the center of our development. Then at the same time, you are hearing something that sounds like a command economy plan, centralized economy, because everything seems to be built around the central government. There's a contradiction there. It's all because we have centralized our system, our politics, our development. So the government is the main driver. But that is not how a democratic development should take place. We should be looking at how we decentralize our development processes. So whilst I appreciate the fact that we should have development planning for the nation, I think we should also be seriously considering, at the same time, having a decentralized political system that will enable development in the country to be driven more at the community or the district level.
Don't we already have that, as seen through our local government structures?
But you see, this planning that we are discussing today, I'm sure they consulted around the country. But when it comes to implementing, you go to the district to ask them what happens. So for me, if we're talking about the command economy, that should be controlled at the center, then this centralized planning makes sense. At the national level, I think what is important is what I think Dr. Brampa alluded to, that we must have a framework in broad strokes so that any government that comes, have a sense of where we're going nationally in the next 30 years or so. That is different from getting the districts to identify their needs, their priorities, and working at that level with the support from central government for it to be driven at the district level. You see, I'm saying this in the context of decentralization, which the Constitution provides, which no government has seriously pursued. We have been successful with administrative decentralization. We have not been successful with political decentralization as well as fiscal decentralization. So everything is commanded at the center. And that has been one of the main drawbacks in our development processes.
And it's an important point. And on the back of what you just, I need to ask you then. So because of several factors, one of which you just mentioned, a lot of the national development plans, in fact, all of them, have not really been realized. We haven't managed to implement them. They become great documents that we refer to every now and then, but nobody actually gets to live the targets. Is it then needed to have another revised document instead of focusing on ensuring that the ones that we've had before are actually implemented and address some of the challenges that you just laid out? That's a question that has been asked on the back of the launch. Are we just interested in putting out a document? Why don't we focus more on the outstanding documents that have not been achieved and realized in the past?
Well, frankly, whilst I appreciate the effort of the present commission, you are asking a very important question, which is why didn't we look at the previous one and examine it to see how best we can implement? But notice that, in fact, that's not even the issue. When government changed, this government, a top official who was then, I think, the presidential advisor or senior minister at the time, said publicly that they don't feel bound by that document and that they are putting it aside and they are developing their own either 10-year or whatever program. And that has been the problem of this country all along, that a new government comes, we jettison what the previous government has put together and we start afresh. So we find that whenever we make 2 steps forward or 3 steps forward, we make 2 steps backwards. That has been a big problem in this country. The fact that new governments throw away what has been started and they want to start something new. If we were to have a national policy for development and the parties are committed to that policy, then their manifestos should draw from that policy. Instead of all the parties coming with different manifestos, quite often even these manifestos, when they're in power, they don't even go by them. They can go tonight and sleep and dream over something. The next day, we hear all kinds of interesting projects that they introduce. So I think we've got to be serious with how we want to plan. Because look, all countries that have developed in recent decades have serious plans and committed to those plans. And again, you made a point earlier in your comments that maybe the short-term arrangements we have for political leadership could be a factor, because certainly 4 years or 8 years cannot be a period for any appreciable development. Because if you look at Singapore, Malaysia, and all these countries, Rwanda, that have developed over the past decades, there was a consistent approach to development for not less than 20 years. Of course, oftentimes under one leader. I'm not saying that we should have a dictatorship or anything of the sort, but the fact is that all countries that have developed in recent years spent some time, not less than 20 years, with a mindset committed to a certain program. We don't have that. And that is something we need to look at.
And I want to put that now to one of the politicians with us, Otokuno, with the NDC. And Mr. Otokuno, how do you respond to that? That the challenge we've had is that the parties simply ignore the plans that exist?
Well, let me start off by saying that the need for a long-term development plan cannot be overemphasized. And that's why the drafters of our constitution put in Chapter 6, the directive principles of state policy, what we need to do with development, and under which section you would realize Article 36 gives some mandate or some express prescription to every government to, within 2 years of the government, provide a coordinated program for shared growth and accelerated development, which every government does, which we call the medium term. And so every government would bring in that medium term, development policy. And essentially under Article 87, the Constitution also made provision for the NDPC to advise the president on the matters of national development policies and so on and so forth, based on our macroeconomic targets, our environmental policy, social policy, and so on and so forth. Now, I believe the problem with national development or long-term national development plan stems from the Constitution and how the Constitution has crafted it. The Constitution, apart from the directive principles of state policy, does not enjoin the political parties to, as it were, act according to the national development plans. And that's why in the year 2000, the MPP could jettison the Vision 2020. And along the line, they tried some poverty reduction strategy, which was also an offshoot of our arrangements with the Bretton Woods institutions and our joining of HIPC and so on and so forth. Now, subsequently, under the NDC, I think that this discussion came up when we did an attempt to review the Constitution. It was a critical part of most of the recommendations that came up. And that was how Dr. Nimoy Thompson and Professor Botwe were started the processes of this new 40-year development plan. You would realize that as part of the processes to get this 40-year development plan in place, an extensive consultation processes were done. Political parties were consulted, including the MPP. And I recall when the MPP took over in 2018, when the 40-year development plan was supposed to start, we heard the senior minister, rightly alluded to by Prof, completely throwing off the 40-year development plan and saying that they don't believe in long-term development plans. And it's been so from the history of our opponents that they do not believe in long-term development plans. So
Peter, now we have a 2057 development plan.
So
although the 40-year development plan still exists, you think this one is necessary? This latest one is necessary?
Yes. So it's rather refreshing to have seen that Dr. Abrampa and his team are going back to this long-term development plan. I dare say that actually what has been launched is just an offshoot of the document that was prepared in 2018, which has been the 40-year development plan, because it's the same 40-year development plan that ends in 2057. And the idea of doing that 40-year development plan was engineered and inspired by the fact that, it is tied to our independence. And you would recall Nkrumah's 7-year development plan was tied to same. And so our idea is that by the time Ghana is 100 years, how do we want to see Ghana? Now, the problem I have with what the position or the view expressed by Dr. Abrampa in this particular case is that for the need of accountability, for which reason the Constitution provided for the Chapter 6, the Directive Principles of State Policy, there is a need for the National Development Plan to be somewhat prescriptive, so that the prescription would allow for accountability. Now, when you open it, you make it moribund. It's only about the vision and broad targets. It gives political, operatives, particularly looking at the arrangement of our Constitution, the luxury to ignore those long-term development plans. And so, if you look at the Black Star Rising, I guess, is the same document perhaps Dr. Abrampa is talking about, which is the Ghana at 100 plan. If you look at that document beyond the broad visions, which are not significantly different from what Dr. Abrampa is talking about, also captures some specific steps, some specific things that must be done to be able to achieve that macroeconomic targets, to be able to achieve that natural resource and social policy development targets, and so on and so forth. In that case, if any government is binded by those, broad frameworks, which may be rather prescriptive, it helps you count.
But
Peter,
the evidence of the last few years show that parties have ignored the existing plan. And that, I guess, is what has influenced this indicative strategy, because parties don't want to be told what to do. So give them a broad framework within which they can then have their own specified plans in their manifestos, but speaks to the broader picture as articulated in the vision.
Okay, so Evans, you see, Ghana is not the only country in the world, and other countries have gone the path that Ghana has gone, and other countries have long-term development plans. And one good thing about development is that there are models that you can follow, and you have seen the outcome of those countries, so you can predict how you will go. Now, there is no country that is having a development plan. That's the development plan encompasses only broad visions. No. Some of the development predictions are prescriptive, and it helps you to draw your program. And that is why the Constitution says in Article 36 that the government must prepare a medium-term 4-year program that responds to those prescriptions in the National Development Plan. Now, when you provide no prescription, then you allow anybody to do what they want. And it's like you don't know where you are going. When you are traveling to a destination, you do not know. Any road will take you there.
But the document will guide you. No, that's not true. I mean, the document will guide you.
But yes, Evans, that's the point I'm making. That you see, if
the indicative document will guide you.
Enough, yes, so if it's prescriptive enough, it enhances the journey, the road you take to your destination. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. Let's, for example, let's look at this typical example of the indicators in the 2018 document. We predicted that in 2021, from 2018 to 2021, we should be reducing energy losses from 24% to 12%. Now, because those prescriptions were totally ignored, and the directives of, if you want, not directives, but the prescriptions that were given were ignored, you realize that by 2021, our losses had rather increased from 24% to 29.7%. Now, one other indicator that, testifies to the need to be a little bit more prescriptive is that in 2018, we were looking at increasing a capital consumption of energy from 348 kilowatts hour per capita to, let's say, 150 kilowatts hour per capita. And what did we see? We have seen that we have performed woefully inadequate, and we have rather reduced from 348 to 302 kilowatts hour per capita.
Peter, let me ask you.
This tells you the effect, the glaring effect of ignoring those prescriptions that are provided.
Because the MDC and the MPP are both in the process of crafting your manifesto. Let me ask you this direct question. So now you have the Vision 2057 document launched yesterday. Will you, in drafting your manifestos and finalizing it, incorporate what has now been refined into this document in your manifestos for 2025 to the next elections, 2028?
Evans, the NDC has been a strong believer in long-term development plans. And that's why we did the first 25-year, the first longest development plan ever in the history of this country. The 25-year development plan we dubbed Vision 2020. And again, it's the same reason why we launched the 40-year development plan, which we called the Black Star Rising. And that 40-year development plan was ending in 2057. I don't know how different this particular document is, but Evans, I can assure you that all our manifestos have been driven by the desire and the principles of those long-term development plans. Particularly
which one?
What 2018, and certainly if there is any new indications in this new document, the NDC will not hesitate at all. And as a member of the manifesto committee, it is one thing that we have been discussing repeatedly, and it is one of the things that will make space in our next attempt towards constitutional review. President Mahama has spoken very passionately about our desire to review the Constitution. Perhaps maybe we may have to be looking at amending Article 87 and perhaps Chapter 6. We will look at Chapter 6 so that it would rather provide some kind of accountability measure on political governance.
Peter, stay with me. I want to bring in Evans Mensah, who is the former majority leader, but also Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, who joins us right now. This has been a campaign of his also. Mr. Mensah, thank you very much. He joins us via phone, and he obviously has been championing the national development plans. He wants the law that actually will compel the parties to draw their manifestos and plans from the national development plan. We have another one that has been launched, Mr. James Abongsu, just yesterday. Now, you just heard the NDC's concern there that it's not prescriptive enough. We've had an explanation from the National Development Planning Commission that you want to give the parties a broad framework from which to operate, and that is why it is indicative. Where do you stand on this subject of, do you make the development plan prescriptive, where it ties the parties down to very specific targets and tells them what to do, or give them a very broad indicative framework from which they operate?
Thank you very much, Evans, for the opportunity. As you rightly alluded to, us being champion of the country, having an agreed upon long-term national development plan. Because it is for the reason of us having an agreed upon long-term development plan, that is for that reason that the Constitution in Article 35 obligates the various administrations. In fact, in Article 35(7), the provision is, as far as practicable, a government shall continue and execute projects and programs commenced by the previous government. So there is an obligation imposed. The point is, if a government does not believe in the programs of the government that he might have succeeded, do you think that that government would continue and execute the projects and programs of the government that would have succeeded? It would not. And then that will amount to a prodigal waste of our resources, our limited resources. And so, Article 35(7) would then not make much sense. But the overall agenda for development is provided for under the directive principles of state policy contained in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And so the Constitution then sets out the political objectives in broad terms, the economic objectives in broad terms, the social in broad terms, educational objectives in broad terms, international relations, cultural objectives, and even the duties of citizens. They are set out in broad terms. So as far as I'm concerned, the mission of our development agenda is set out in the directive principles of state policy. And the reason why the various provisions use the operative word shall. 35 political objectives begins, government shall be a democratic state. 2, the state shall protect and safeguard the independence of the territorial integrity of Ghana and shall seek the well-being of the citizens. The state shall do this, the state shall do this, the state shall do this. That is for political objectives. You come to the economic objectives beginning with 36. It's an imposition of obligations on the state. And the execution of these obligations will be done by the various governments, which is why if I heard my compatriot well, when he quoted the imperatives of 36(5), which said that for purposes of the foregoing clauses of this article, within 2 years after assuming office, the President shall present to Parliament a coordinated program of economic and social development policies, including agricultural and industrial programs at all levels and all the regions of Ghana. Don't forget that preceding the pipe, that is 36(2), provides that the state shall undertake even and balanced development of all the regions and every part of each region, and in particular improving the conditions of life in the rural areas and generally redressing any imbalance in development between the rural and the urban areas. So the follow-up then says, for purposes of the foregoing clauses of this article, within 2 years, the president shall present to Parliament a coordinated program. Now, if we had I'm just saying that the broad contours of our development agenda are provided under the various principles of state policy.
Yeah.
Which is why I keep saying that in Ghana here, the various political parties are all consigned to the center. So there are no extreme parties. We are all centrist parties. The MPP, a little bit to the right of the center, NDC, a little bit to the left of the center, right? It is the reason why maybe a liberal conservative party like the MPP, it is that comes and then begins the country on a new path, national health insurance. It's a prescription by the Constitution. Then the next one is free senior high. Again, a prescription by the Constitution. So the agenda for overall national development, the prescription is set out there.
Let me bring you to the specifics of what was launched yesterday, the Vision 2057, which broadly sets out.
With your indulgence, let me just wind up on this, and then I will respond to the question that you may raise. The difficulty for us being not just amending Article 87, as my colleague, if I heard him right, talk about. It's not just about 87. It is about 86. The very composition of the NDPC, which says that there shall be a commission that shall consist of a chairman who shall be appointed by the president. Right? So the president appoints. Yes. Then the second one is the minister responsible for finance and such other ministers of state as the president may appoint. That is, ministers of state under a particular government, believing in their own manifesto because there's no long-term development plan. The government statistician, the governor of the Bank of Ghana, one representative each from each of the regions of Ghana, appointed by the Regional Coordinating Council of each region. 16 of them now. So 16 coming from the regions. But you do know that all of them will be politically tainted. Such other persons as may be appointed by the president, having regard to their knowledge, all of them, I would dare suggest, will be people with political party minister. Needless to say, today as we speak, we have about 49 members of the NDPC. How many of them are not politically tainted?
So what's your prescription? What's your prescription there?
So I believe that we should look at the very composition of the NDPC, amend Article 86. Because you see, regardless of the quality of the produce, when we first came to Parliament, Rawlings was talking about Vision 2015. That was 1997 when we first came to Parliament. It was later amended, that document was later amended to Vision 2020 because of the composition of the NDPC.
So are you recommending that you change the law to make the appointment apolitical?
We change the law to make the composition be really reflective of a cross-section of society. And I would suggest that we make it very independent, devoid of political coloration.
You want to strip the president? You want to strip the president of the power to appoint?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. The president may appoint, but it will be subject to. We can say that some constituent groups in the country, like the TUC, like academia, like professionals in various fields of endeavor, be given the opportunity to elect or nominate people to that body, and the president will appoint them to office.
Okay, let me quickly ask you. Let me quickly ask you then. I mean, you are also the chairman of the MPP 2024 Manifesto Committee. In drafting and finalizing your manifesto, are you drawing from the existing development plan? Before what was launched yesterday, you had the 40-year development plan. Has that been the basis for crafting your manifesto?
I would say that I would not want to really be specific on that.
Why?
There are various documents in this country that you consult and accept what is good from those documents.
I mean, but I'm curious why you won't say that, because this is something you've been championing. You have an opportunity now to chair the committee to make sure that the development plan that exists is what guides your manifesto. I'm just wondering what are you doing there?
I'm just saying that we have so many of them. Vision 2020. It is not a useless document. Then we had the one that was generated by Professor Jambafo and Evans Mensah, which was jettisoned by the NDC. It's a good document that we can make useful extractions from. The one that was fashioned by Dr. Professor Kusibuchwe and Dr. Nimoy Johnson, the one that was launched at in the dying members of the NDC. I mean, also a good document, right? The one that has come out now, yesterday, I must honestly say that even though I've had some discussions, I've not really assessed that document, even though I've had some snippets given to me. But I've not covered the entire terrain of the document. What is useful, that we find useful, would be incorporated into our document. I'm just saying that we're not limiting our consultations to that document alone. The others that are being done and dusted, we'll look at all of them.
So I guess bottom
there
line,
must be something useful in all of them.
Bottom line, your work is being guided by the existing national development plans.
We certainly would look at those documents, and we have looked at them. We have looked at some of them, I should say, and the useful section would incorporate.
Okay. Chairman Sabunsu, thank you very much. He's the chairman of the MPP 2024 Manifesto Committee. I want to go back very quickly as we begin to wrap up on this conversation to Dr. Brampa. Of course, he's the current Director General of the NDPC. And I have a message that I want to read to you, and this is from your predecessor, Nimoy Thompson, when this matter came up, when you launched this. I want to read what he said about the Vision 2057 document that was launched. And he says, quote, "An exercise in futility. There are real issues facing the implementation of existing plans. The 40-year development plan, for example, recommended a reduction in distribution losses by ECG from 24% to 12% in 2021 and 5% in 2029. Instead, it went up to 30%. Does anybody think a mere change in name will make the things any better? A country called Ghana, indeed." How do you respond to that?
Well, this is exactly what we are talking about. You see, these are targets with indicators. It is incumbent, and just like Peter also said, if we want to reduce losses, but then the means of reducing these losses become very specific, and that's what we're talking about. Holding government to targets is very, very important in this process. But let me just also add that generally, it is not just the long-term framework, solving the problem. It is within a system of other things. There are legal implications and legal issues which are being taken up at the same time that this framework has been launched. There are also issues which are also political. Political in the sense that the citizens must be informed, civil society must be active, there must be the political parties themselves who should work based upon objective documents which can also get us to these targets. So these are all elements which we are looking at. And all that the Honorable Chairman Sabunsu said is something which is being done practical. The vision which has been expressed here is just one of the elements. The linkage between the plan and the budget. This is very critical. An act was passed in 2016, legislative instrument passed in 2020, but linking that, so the long-term plan came out the medium-term plans. Medium-term plans can only be implemented when they are linked to the national budget. This is the gap we saw. And this is something we've worked on assiduously in the last 3 years. So whether electricity will be reduced, waste to be reduced or not, it requires resources to be placed there, prioritized as an issue to be dealt with, along all the other problems. And this is very important. And this is one area which we've worked on and practically solving it.
Well,
so that it makes the plan relevant.
Well, you raised the point about...
If the plan is not expressed in terms of resources, it is basically a document. This is key.
You raised the issue about relevance, but
yes.
Nimue Thompson says this document is an exercise in futility. You agree?
Not at all. Not at all, because we are looking at it not in one element of coming out with the plan, but dealing with the whole system.
But
as I indicated, the question legal system, the fiscal system, and all that. So it is not just one thing.
The question is, though,
yes,
we have missed previous targets expressed in previous national development plans.
Yes.
Why do you think you also be different?
Ours is different because we are not looking at just a single problem, but we are looking at the problem within a system where a plan is linked to the resource distribution and prioritization. This is something we have missed. A situation when a plan is linked to the whole decentralization process, as Professor Balfour said. So it's not just looking at one element. What we have launched is one of the means, identifying a vision, defining targets, and indicating strategic processes there. There are other elements that ought to be done simultaneously.
And very briefly, and I'll go around with this question.
Yes.
How are you set targets now, very clear targets. Yeah. Who is going to ensure monitoring and enforcement of these targets?
If you look at our system, it's clear. Monitoring and evaluation technically starts with the National Development Planning Commission, working with the decentralized institutions and the public system, Then these reports are sent to Parliament. The monitoring reports are sent to Parliament annually. In our system, this is deliberated upon, but it has to come back to the government, to the executive. Parliament must engage the executive in order to turn this around, because monitoring becomes relevant when it leads to change, when it leads to learning, it leads to review, and place us back on the path that we want to undertake.
But Professor Balfour,
there's a technical part of it, there's a political part of it, there's an oversight part
let me Professor Balfour, very briefly, what will be your recommendation if this latest document is to actually lead to something practical that is implemented, that affects our lives?
I'm sure our viewers, Ghanaians listening to us, will be scratching their heads, wondering whether any of these many development agendas or plans we have made in this country has brought any food on their table, has put money in their pockets. Because if any of these development plans has achieved anything, I don't think Ghanaians will be as frustrated as they are today. Look, the focus of development is improving the well-being of people. And that requires the creation of wealth. So I'm asking myself, all these things that we do, is the target creating wealth or what? If we are not creating wealth, then of course, development is shortchanged. So if you ask me whether this is going to be achieved and what it's going to be, I think Ghanaians should be the judge of that.
But what must we do? What must we do differently to change the narrative? To change the narrative.
What we should do differently is what I said earlier, which is that let's be serious with decentralization and make sure development is driven from the bottom up. This centralized command approach to development is failing us. So if, in fact, the districts were empowered with what it takes for them to plan and make their priorities, instead of bureaucrats sitting in Accra and determining where hospitals should be located and schools should be built.
Goodness me, I may have lost him there in this connection. Peter Boamah Tokuno, to you next, very, very briefly, if you may. Chairman Sambongsi suggested that we also need to amend the Constitution to change the way the NDPC structure in itself is constructed, including its membership. Is this something that the NDC supports in terms of making sure that its representation is broad-based, apolitical, and represents the people? Peter Bomotokuno? Okay, we lost him right there. But listen, thank you very much all for joining us on this conversation. This is obviously something that affects you, and as we just heard there, Bafa Jumandia Express is about putting food on your table. So all the development plans that went through from the beginning, if they haven't done that, why are we still drafting development plans? Enjoy the rest of your evening.